Hello, everyone. I'm Noreen Purcell Dillman, the creator of the Healthy Peaceful podcast. About me, I describe myself as a former attorney, YouTuber, natural food chef, wellness guru. No, that's not a typo. It actually means precious one. If you haven't been following me, you may be wondering what this podcast of 4 years is all about. It's a place where I interview individuals on topics pertaining to the meaning of health and well-being, personal and collective consciousness, and maximizing full human potential. This episode is a part of a series between me and Chef Rich LaMarita. During this series, we delve into the 8 principles of food in the ancient system of health and well-being called Ayurveda. What I really like about this series and what I feel Chef Rich literally brings to the table, and I've studied many Ayurvedic cookbooks and other written materials about the Ayurvedic approach to food. I've discovered few, however, written by a professional chef who is also completely in tune with what appeals to the American palate. So here, instead of presenting yet another litany of lists and do's and don'ts of what to eat if you want to try Ayurveda, Rich asks us to join him on a journey of the senses. I've discovered, and I'm sure you will too, that no one wants to embrace an Ayurvedic approach to food and health unless there is some sensory delight, meaning pleasure of the senses. So let's delve in with Chef Rich, acknowledging that initially we may feel confused, but with some practice, an Ayurvedic approach to our daily food will become second nature. Naturally, we will begin to see our health transform. And once this magic starts to happen, we will want to fully embrace Ayurvedic principles. The first principle is Prakriti. We often hear this word referred to in Ayurveda to describe our own individual nature, essentially what our doshic makeup was at birth, our own mind-body type, and the North Star for the balancing principles that Ayurveda furnishes. We don't often hear it referred to when we speak about food, but food also has a Prakriti, an inherent nature. Specifically, Rich will bring us on a journey through the 6 tastes and how, according to Ayurveda, these tastes have a unique effect on our Prakriti, our own mind-body type. The second principle of food that Rich will introduce is karana, or preparation, and how different methods of food preparation impact our physiology and mental outlook. The third principle is samyoga, or food combining. Without becoming too rigid, we want to become aware of how Ayurveda views different combinations of food, and what are the definite faux pas and what we can regularly incorporate for maximum health and well-being. The fourth principle is rashi, or amount. Ayurveda has a formula for the quantity that is considered too little, too much, and just right. The state of our appetite, or what is called agni, will also be considered, as well as times of day. Caution here, we may append that universal American belief that a large breakfast is required to fuel your day. The fifth principle is dashen, or the source of food, and where we consume the food. We are all familiar with what is now universally adopted by those who truly care about their health. Eat what grows locally and organic, if at all possible. Yet we all continue to enjoy our avocados. Rich will share the Ayurvedic view here. The sixth principle is kala, or time, and will include daily eating habits, meaning what times a day are most appropriate and the quantity of the food for each meal. Kala, or time, also relates to each season and how our diets will change with the seasons. We will also address times of life. What we eat when we are 62 and the quantities we eat at 62 are dramatically different than what we eat when we're age 12. The seventh principle is called Upayoga Samstha, or rules for food intake. Here, Rich expounds on the culture of eating and our habits, essentially how we behave before, during, and after a meal. The eighth principle, or Upayukta, considers the person who is eating, essentially his or her mental state. In Ayurveda, these states are called sattva, rajas, and tamas. And also the strength of our digestion. Is it balanced or imbalanced? And how do we remedy imbalanced digestion? Now, a bit about Chef Rich. Currently, Chef Rich LaMarita calls New York City home. He was a chef instructor at the Natural Gourmet Institute in Manhattan for over 25 years. This is where Rich and I met, as I was a student there. NGI was formed by Anne Marie Colvin, a well-known proponent of the connection between food and health, also a proponent of natural foods and the author of many books pertaining to these topics, including her seminal work titled Food and Healing. While at NGI, Rich's specialties included the following: vegetarian cuisine, vegan, Indian, and Italian. Rich has also worked with numerous well-known chefs in New York City, including Floyd Cardoz, Dan Kluger, and Ben Pollinger. He has also worked as a private chef for many notable families and as a private instructor in Manhattan and the Hamptons since 1995. Rich has been a practitioner and teacher of Ayurveda for 35 years. He has studied with Vedic and Ayurvedic master Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation, TL. Rich has led seminars on Ayurvedic diet, cooking, yoga, and meditation throughout the US, Europe, and Asia. Rich joined the Institute of Culinary Education in 2019, ICE, teaching plant-based culinary arts career classes and leading recreational classes in Ayurvedic, Asian, and vegan cuisines. He is also a graduate of Maharishi International University's master's degree program in Maharishi Ayurveda and Integrative Medicine, a program where he is currently teaching as a TA. Wow. After reading this, I hope you're as excited as I am. And I realize how special it is to have a guest like Rich LaMarita. I hope you will find this series as enjoyable as I have. Now let's dive in. We're continuing our series on Ayurveda and the nature of food. We're going to be covering a number of things in this series, but right now we're on the Prakriti, which again is the nature of food. And if you want to catch up with us, do look at first video in this series where we covered part of the six tastes, but we're just going to jump right in today and continue with the six tastes and how Ayurveda perceives the six tastes. Good morning, Rich. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine, Noreen. Thanks for having me again.
You know what, Rich? I'm going to re-record because I think I said good afternoon and then I said good morning.
Okay,
Cut.
okay.
All right, that's good. All right. Good morning. This morning I've got a wonderful guest, Rich LaMarita, Chef Rich LaMarita. This is the second part of a series that we're doing on Ayurveda and food. Last time we left off on the nature of food and specifically the six tastes. We covered sweet, sour, and salty. So this is the nature of food, the Prakriti in Ayurveda, it is called. So we're going to jump right in today and we're going to start with the taste in Ayurveda, pungent. Good morning, Rich. How are you today?
I'm fine, Noreen. Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome, awesome. So let's just back up a little bit. Just kind of for viewers and listeners who haven't seen the first video. Um, how about the six tastes and just the overall significance in Ayurveda? Why the tastes are important?
Yes, Ayurveda recognizes six tastes: sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. And each of these tastes has a specific energy, so to speak, in terms of how they affect our body, how they affect our basic functioning, inner intelligence. It's very essential that we get this effect every single day. So Ayurveda recommends that you have these six tastes every day, even in every meal would be ideal. The tastes also are an indication of each taste has a certain dominance of the elements. So when you're getting the balance of all these six tastes, you are essentially getting the balance of all the five elements that Ayurveda speaks about, which is space, air, fire, water, and earth. So yeah, it's a fundamental concept in terms of diet that you should have a variety and a balance of six tastes.
So, um, just Ayurveda 101. Why is it important that we're connecting with these elements on a daily basis through the taste?
Oh, beautiful question. Yeah. So the five elements are what make up uh, our world, which what make up our all physical creation. And it's also what makes up our bodies. Our bodies are composed of these five fundamental elements of skin, space, air, fire, water, earth. The way they function in the body is through what is called the three doshas, vata, pitta, kapha. Vata is the elements of space and air functioning. Pitta is the elements of fire and water functioning. And Kapha is the elements of water and earth functioning. In order for our in order to be healthy and in order to be balanced, in order for our fundamental inner intelligence to really activate and work properly, these elements must be in balance within us based on our nature. And our nature in Ayurveda is called our prakriti. What unique characteristics or what unique composition of these elements within us are. So when we take in these elements from the outside, we're also creating the balance of these elements within us as well.
That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I mean, we're just it's that connection versus disconnection,
Mm.
and it's really creating the opportunity for that reconnection and, as you indicated, balance. Great. So let's jump into pungent. I know that's quite an exciting taste, and that they really go for pungent. But tell us about pungent and why the taste pungent is important in Ayurveda and what it balances, what it does, some examples.
Yeah, pungent is one of my favorites. Uh, it's a taste that people either like or they might be afraid of at the same time in terms of pungency, spiciness, heat. One of the things we can immediately say with regard to understanding pungent in Ayurveda is that pungent doesn't necessarily mean heat. Heat.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Okay,
it
because
doesn't
we often
necessarily.
think about pungent as
Yeah,
heating.
it doesn't necessarily. It can, but it doesn't necessarily have to be heat. The pungent taste, its main effect on the body is to increase metabolism, to strengthen
Mm,
digestion, to help toxins move out of the body. It's a fuel for the body. It's a fuel for the body. These are going to be foods that contain the elements of air and fire within them. Think about those elements, air and
mm,
fire. They complement each other, they ignite each other, right? Fire needs
yeah,
air,
yeah.
right? Um, so this is the effect that these foods have on the body is that it starts to kind of ignite our metabolism. It increases metabolism, strengthens digestion, promotes healthy functioning of the bodily functions. It opens up our blood vessels, promotes circulation, cleanses, reduces foreign material, helps discharge bodily waste. So many beautiful things happen with pungent taste. And what we're talking about is spices and herbs. Spices
Mm.
and herbs. But that means all spices and herbs. So it
Well,
can be,
I actually love Rich. When you use the word ignite, that's just like the perfect word for pungent.
yeah, yeah, correct. Right,
And you have the image of the fire igniting as well,
right.
which of course requires the right amount of air in order to ignite properly. So that's great.
Exactly.
So continue.
Yeah. So uh, pungent doesn't necessarily have to be when we were talking about spices and herbs. It can mean the spices and herbs that are heating, like chilies, ginger, black pepper, things like that. But in this category, it's also the herbs that are actually cooling, like mint and fennel and coriander. Uh, so any spice and herb is considered pungent in Ayurveda, as well as certain vegetables with pungent notes to them, such as radish, um, such as even a little, even arugula a little bit. Arugula is an interesting food. It's kind of sweet, it's bitter, but it also has a little bit of spiciness to it. So there's a little bit of pungency there. So the idea here that's important is that pungent is not just heat. When you start looking at spices carefully, you can categorize spices as either being kind of a warming, heating spice that does increase heat in the body. Again, so like black pepper, chilies, um, and then warming spices like a cinnamon and clove is actually considered warming. But you can also, again, look at cooling spices, again, like mint, fennel, coriander. And then there are certain spices that are kind of middle of the road almost, but just very, very good for digestion, like cumin and hing, which is asafoetida. So,
Hmm?
so the bottom line here is that spices pungent, the pungent taste doesn't necessarily mean heat. Okay, so
That,
what's going to
yeah,
happen?
that's important for because lots of times we really think spicy, heating, pungent. So an example of a pungent spice, would those spices that you listed be considered pungent spices that are cooling, like mint, fennel, and coriander, or would
Yeah,
they?
yeah.
Okay,
Those
so
are classics.
they would,
Those are classic spices that are cooling. And again, when we talk spices, we mean spices and herbs. Spices
of
and
course,
herbs.
herbs and spices, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
that's great. That's great. And I know in Ayurveda, I mean, the pungent taste is not necessarily something you don't want to have necessarily a lot of that taste,
This
because it can
is
be a relatively strong taste. So my understanding is that a little goes a long way.
absolutely, because again, you have to remember uh what are the elements associated with it, and it's air and fire. So if you are taking a lot of spices, you're increasing air and fire. What is air and fire in Ayurveda? Air is vata and fire is pitta. Okay, so when you eat a lot of spices, you're going to increase vata, and it's going to increase pitta. It's going to increase pitta. Now the heating ones are the ones you really have to watch, particularly if, let's say, if you are pitta and you're prone to pitta imbalances, then it's not recommended that you eat very spicy or heating foods, that you
Yeah,
favor.
yeah, you have to be a little more cautious.
Right.
You might want to err if you're trying to incorporate the pungent taste in your daily diet. You might want to err on the side of looking at those that have a cooling effect.
The more cooling ones. Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Like
all
again,
right,
like fennel and cardamom also is one, and
sure.
dill. Um, right? So for instance, again,
Yeah.
like ginger is a heating spice. It's called the universal medicine. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's it's good for all doshas in moderation, but it is heating. So ginger is heating. The fresh ginger is heating. So if you're strong pitta, if there's some pitta imbalance, then you might watch how your intake of ginger. But for instance, like dry ginger is less heating than the fresh ginger. Dry ginger is actually has a little bit more sweetness to it, so that's actually would be okay, you know.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting that even the fresh spice is going to have different properties than the dry spice as well. So um, it can get
Yeah,
pretty complicated, I assume.
yeah, but not that much in terms of
Okay.
because ginger is an example where we do have a fresh version of it and a dry version. But something like pepper, cumin, um, you know, there's not that. We just have usually have the spice, the dry spice of it.
Sure, sure. Okay. But I think, at first when people are introduced to this, it can seem a little bit daunting. But then it's just, it's just like riding a bicycle. You start using the spices, you start tuning into how you're feeling in your body. And
Hmm.
over time, you're just incorporating these spices and these herbs on a regular basis, depending on your particular constitution, your property, and really your state of balance. Would you say that would be correct?
Very correct. That's absolutely true. I mean, we use herbs very, very readily. Most people feel comfortable using herbs. They have an herb garden and they love basil and mint and peppermint and oregano and sage. And they all have this effect. They're all considered pungent taste. We should also think of spices in the same way. You should have a spice cabinet, and it should be mainly composed of the whole spice rather than the ground spice, because ground spices do not have as long of a shelf life as the whole spice. And then you can grind them up yourself in a spice grinder, or which is just a coffee mill. But they should be used also every day in your cooking. Use spices just like we use fresh herbs, you know?
Yeah, you bring up a good point as well that spices do have an expiration date in terms of maybe it's not what's on the bottle, but it's probably sooner than what's on the bottle. So
Yeah, let
Ayurveda
me,
seems to Ayurveda seems to emphasize the prana in all of our food, and even spices have a prana.
yeah,
So just simply using a coffee mill, a $10 coffee grinder, and buying whole spices, that,
yeah.
in terms of the liveliness of the body and the energetic effect, would you say that's important?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's very important. And you're going to notice the difference immediately in the taste, because when you freshly grind your whole spices, by the way, they have a shelf life that's about a year, it's said. So
Sure.
a whole spice can stay in your shelf a year, if it's properly kept, which means in a cool, dry place in your pantry, jar or something like that. But when you grind them fresh, even being around for a period of time, you just smell that freshness. And then if you grind the spice and then let it sit out for months, and then you open it up and smell it, it's like it's not much there. The shelf life, the shelf life of a ground spice, they say, is about a month, and that's being kind. I worked with an Indian chef in a restaurant in the past some years ago, and we had to grind our spices freshly every single day uh,
Wow.
for him. Yeah, for,
That's
for
probably not the case. Would you say that's probably, maybe I would say that's probably not the case in most Indian restaurants. Would you say that's correct?
I can't speak to other Indian restaurants. There are a lot of great ones out there these days.
Sure, sure.
Uh, but you know, I probably a good Indian restaurant is going to have a really
Wow,
nice spice pantry,
sure.
and you're going to at least favor the fresh ones, right?
Wow. Well, that shows a certain amount of care, respect, and consideration for food and cooking. So
Yeah,
that's an awesome opportunity that you had.
right.
Okay, so pungent, getting back to pungent. We're talking about the doshas. People want to know about the doshas and what the impact of a particular spice or a particular taste is on the doshas. And we talked about the elements. So
Hmm.
translate that. You said it increases uh, air it's the air and the fire element. So what's the impact on the doshas of the pungent spice?
Yeah, so a pungent is really good for kapha, really
Mm,
good for that excess of water and earth. Particularly if you have a kapha, a little bit of a kapha imbalance, a little bit of a kapha accumulation. You're feeling slow. Metabolism is a little bit low. You feel sleepy. Maybe there's a little bit of weight gain going on. Which are indications of kapha imbalance. Increasing spices in your diet is one of the best things you can do. And either the cooling or the heating here, but for kapha, they can take a little bit of that of those heating spices. So if they can
Sure,
tolerate,
sure.
if they don't mind the flavor, it's really good for them because that what that does is that's the fuel for the body. It will ignite and increase metabolism. It will help to get rid of ama, which is the toxins in the body, which tend to clog the body and get in the way of our inner intelligence to function properly. So it's highly recommended, for when you have a kapha imbalance to increase the pungent taste.
That's
For
great, actually. And you know what? You and I, we talk about ama like it's a household word, and
mm,
even toxins. Americans, when they hear toxins, they're thinking, well, they're not quite sure. They're not quite sure exactly
right.
what we're talking about, I think. So I think ama is an important topic. And we're not going to go in great detail right now, but just generally, if somebody has ama in Ayurveda, what are some of the signs and symptoms of ama? Like how would I know if I have if I'm having ama and the body's not quite, you know, doing what it should be doing? So
Yeah,
tell me a little bit about that. I think
that's a
that's
great.
important.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question. Ama, first of all, is food material in the body that's not properly digested. And even though it's not properly digested, it's inside the body and it's spreading through the body. It's going through the channels of the body. It's mixing with the tissues of the body. And it stays there. It kind of ferments a little bit. Um, and it turns into material in the body that blocks our channels, that 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 disrupts the functioning of our tissue, and what we call it in kind of a general word of kind of unwanted material or toxins in the body. Not toxins in the sense of like we're eating a poison, but material in the body that shouldn't be there. Okay, um, so if if to know that if you're having toxins, if you're having ama in the body, would be, for instance, slow digestion. You're feeling heavy, particularly you feel heavy after meals. Um, you know, feeling uh, feeling feeling sleepy a lot. Um, excessive weight gain. Um, let's see, what else would be good
Well,
indication?
it'd also be the coating on the tongue.
Coating on the tongue, right? There's a kind of the white coating on the tongue that you get in the morning. Yeah, things like bad breath, chronic bad breath, um, a feeling of heaviness, a feeling of kind of not very clear in the mind, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So it's really kind of that you just how some days you wake up and you're just feeling a little off,
Exactly. Yeah.
and you're not feeling just that kind of enthusiasm.
Right. Yeah. Low enthusiasm, low energy. Right. Right. Low
So
enthusiasm,
I think they don't low energy and low enthusiasm. It's not an automatic that it's an ama, but it's a good indication that there could be some things in the physiology that are happening that you could greatly improve and take a look at.
right. Right. Right.
So
It's going to be building. It's going to be building. If it starts to become a normal thing, then that's a sign that ama is building up. If your processes of elimination become very out of balance, um, you either have constipation or some diarrhea or something. Things are not working in digestion. This is all indication that there's some buildup, some ama in the body. So that needs to go. That needs to go. And Ayurveda has a lot of kind of prescriptions to help that help this material go. And one of them is most definitely increasing pungent taste, increasing spices in the diet. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really great
The
because,
metabolism is going to burn it out. It's going to help to burn it out, you know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, we hear that expression in Ayurveda, you want to burn the ama. So and we don't want to burn it where we were excessive, but and also the principle that you mentioned in the last video of the principle of opposites and
Mhm.
like increases like and how we interact with how we approach certain imbalances in Ayurveda in terms of treating them with opposites.
Right.
So the pungent taste, which is very heavy, and it's a combination. I mean, Kapha is quite heavy. You got the earth and water elements, and we bring in the principle of opposites here. Would you
Mm-hmm.
say that's correct with bringing in the pungent taste and fire and air?
That's exactly right. That's always going to be the principle in terms of treatment in Ayurveda. Always. When you have too much earth, when you have too much, kapha is water and earth. When you have too much water and earth, what do you need to bring in? You need to bring in air and fire. And there's no better food for that than pungent.
Right. And bringing in the air and the fire elements, there are other ways to do that too. Exercise,
Yep.
a variety of things that you can do, but diet is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Cool,
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
And
And you talked a lot about,
it's been found that pungent is in terms of modern nutrition and modern thinking, pungent is a stimulant. It's a diaphoretic. In other words, when we eat spices, when we take on spices, it has a slight stimulant effect. It's a diaphoretic, which means that it helps to increase perspiration. So that's very cleansing. And it's also an expectorant. When we eat spices, certain spices particularly, it's an expectorant is a food that helps to relieve that it helps to remove mucus.
congestion and that kind of kapha buildup that can build up in the chest
Yeah,
and the mucous membranes.
right, right. So
Yeah, yeah,
pungent and spices help that. Yes.
that's great. It's great. Awesome. Yeah. You talked about arugula and you mentioned daikon and radish in general in terms of being pungent.
Yeah.
And we talked a good bit about spices, but any other foods that
That I can think of.
um,
Yeah. So again,
that
food is complex, and food is not just one taste. So
right.
arugula is a good example of that. Arugula is a food
Mm-hmm.
that is it's sweet. It has some sweetness to it. It's a green. It's bitter, but it also has some little spiciness to it. So it's pungent. So it
Yeah,
has
it's kind of peppery.
yeah, it has three tastes. Um, a radish, daikon radish, is astringent. When you bite into it, it has a little bit of a drying effect in the mouth. But it's also very peppery. So, a radish, particularly kind of that little spicy the daikon radish, is definitely astringent and pungent at the same time. So foods can be combinations. Mustard greens, another example. You know, mustard greens are bitter. They're very, very bitter, but at the same time, very peppery. So they're going to have some pungent nature to them. So yeah, if you think about it, there are foods out there that are well, many foods are a combination of taste, but there are foods that have a little bit of pungency in them for sure. Mm.
Great. No, awesome. That's really helpful. Before we move on to the next taste, have we exhausted pungent or is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I think we've covered a lot on that. Yeah, we've covered a
Okay,
lot.
cool.
We can move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the next taste of the sixth taste is bitter.
Hmm.
So tell me what you know about bitter. Why is it important? Why do I need to have the bitter taste? Examples of the bitter taste. Think about
Okay,
Americans and how they can access bitter.
great. This is also a really interesting taste, a favorite of mine and not a favorite of a lot of people because bitter is bitter taste, and people kind of shy away from bitter taste. Um, we're talking here mainly about greens, greens,
Mm-hmm. You're talking
um,
about leafy greens?
leafy greens, salad greens, as well as the more hardy greens that we consider like cooking greens. Okay. There's also vegetables in this category too. Again, there's these vegetables that are a combination of tastes and have some bitter notes to them, such as artichoke, such as
Mm.
asparagus. Asparagus has a slightly bitter taste to them. Think about Brussels sprouts, right? Nobody likes Brussels. No, that's not fair, but Brussels sprouts are,
Well, either
can be
I
bitter.
think they're Brussels are either something you either love or you love or it's kind of people have a love-hate relationship with Brussels sprouts.
Right.
But they just haven't had your Brussels sprouts.
That's true. That's another whole topic which we're going to get to as we go on in our podcast.
Because, well, no, go back to Brussels sprouts for a moment. Because most of the time people will steam them, they'll overcook them, they'll turn into that like olive green broccoli color,
Yeah.
that overcooked broccoli has. And they'll just be kind of a soggy kind of,
Oh,
cabbagey,
yeah.
not even the beautifully prepared cabbage that's melted or something. It's more like, and but roast the Brussels sprouts.
Whole different picture, right?
And now you have created, you can't stop eating Brussels sprouts.
Right. Right. Right.
But
Yeah.
but they are challenging to digest.
Yeah. 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 I think any of the cruciferous, can be that way. And yeah, it could be a little bit difficult to digest. So anyway, that's the kind of foods in bitter, the kind of foods that people do shy away from. When people create a meal, when a lot of not chefs, but when you're making a meal, bitter is often the one taste that's kind of left out. But it's also the
Yeah,
easiest to get in because there's so much that you can do with leafy greens and make them taste
right.
really delicious.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it a beautiful, beautiful, and also a very important taste? It's nature's anti-inflammatory. Whenever,
Oh, okay.
whenever you pick up, whenever you pick up an article, read an article about leafy greens or about how to increase more anti-inflammatory foods in your diet, there's always going to be a discussion about leafy greens. Why? Well, let's look at the elements associated in this food. Bitter is going to be predominant of space and air. Space and air. Okay. Now, let's think of the characteristics of space and air. It's light, it's moving, it's cold, it's subtle, it's quick, it's dispersing, it's drying, it's purifying. Late space and air. Air moves,
Yeah, so it's totally
blows
the
everything
vata
away.
the vata qualities.
It's pure vata. Great. And
Right.
that's the effect that it's going to have in the body. The effects
Mm,
of light, moving, dispersing, drying, purifying in the body.
yeah.
So it's think about when you learn, when you learn about sanitation, for instance, and bacteria growth and pathogen growth
Pathogens. Mhm.
outside and inside the body. Think about the environment that's ideal for them to grow. Okay, everybody knows these pathogens grow best in a moist, warm environment, right? Okay.
Yes, yes.
You want to ferment something, you want to ferment it quickly, moist, warm environment, and then that bacteria growth will be really fast. This is the exact opposite. Air and space. It's not moist, it's dry, and it's cool. So light, moving, cold, drying, purifying. This is the effect that it's creating inside the
Actually,
body.
that's that's actually very helpful even for me who knows a little bit about Ayurveda. I never quite heard it, described that way. So that's, you
Yeah,
talking about the bacteria and the moist, warm environment and kind of what's going to counteract that. And that
yeah,
these leafy greens are nature's medicine in terms of, the upward movement and the anti-inflammatory impact. So thank you for that.
exactly,
It's
exactly. It's
really,
anti-inflammatory, it's detoxifying. It helps with skin conditions. It absorbs and removes fat and toxic accumulations. It cleanses the blood. It's such an important taste and such an important effects take place when we eat these leafy greens. Think about medicines today. Um, Medicines are mostly bitter. Pharmaceuticals, okay,
mm,
are mostly bitter. And pharmaceuticals originally came from plants, right?
mm,
So, uh, there was this kind of almost, intuitive understanding that these bitter herbs and bitter greens were very medicinal in a sense, you know. So it kind of gives us an understanding of why medicines are so bitter because they are nature's anti-inflammatories, you know.
yeah, yeah, no, that's another example that's um, totally in line with what you're describing in terms of the bitter taste.
Right.
So we're talking about greens. America's favorite bitter taste, of course, is coffee
Yeah. So
or bitter food, I should say, not bitter taste.
yeah, I mean coffee is considered bitter, okay?
Hmm.
Because it has that it's also bitter and a little bit of astringency because it has a kind of a tannic nature to it. Um, so yeah, I mean, but coffee is an interesting example here. You can't put it in the same exact category as leafy greens, mainly because there's a concept in Ayurveda called pravab, which is the kind of there's specific active ingredients in certain foods that are very specific to a food. Um, so, like for
The
instance,
prabhav being that generally, if you have a certain taste, you expect a certain effect in the body, but there are certain foods that don't follow that typical formula. They do something different. They have a special effect in the body and something that we don't expect.
yeah, well, that's actually called vipak. That's actually called vipak, but pravab is more of the kind of a modern view, kind of the active ingredient. So in coffee, for instance,
Okay,
you have caffeine. There's caffeine
sure.
in coffee. So
Yeah.
whereas you do get some of the bitter effects from coffee, and coffee
Yeah.
can be very medicinal.
Hmm.
A lot of whatever you're reading about coffee, it can be either or, Some people, oh, it's not good food, but it can be a good food. Have 1 or 2 cups a day. Don't drink coffee. People are
So
unsure about it
it's all over the map. And I know that Ayurveda doesn't necessarily encourage coffee. Do you want to talk about why it doesn't encourage coffee?
because of the caffeine. It's
Right.
very stimulating. It's
Right.
it's the caffeine is a specific active ingredient in coffee that is stimulating. Okay. And therefore, not very good for vata in particular. Okay. Um, so that's the reason. That's the reason there. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's doing a job on the adrenals and it's, doing all the things that we know about. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not necessarily encouraged.
Right.
Um,
Right.
yeah. How about foods in this particular category? You talked about the leafy greens or spices. We talked about some of the foods. They're particularly leafy greens. But how about spices that are in the bitter
Yeah.
category? Is there anything that you can share there?
Perfect example of this is turmeric.
Okay.
Turmeric is turmeric is a pungent flavor, but at the same
Mm,
time, it's one of the most bitter of herbs, bitter of spices, one of the most bitter of spices. Uh, And for that reason, it's also whenever you read about turmeric, you read about its anti-inflammatory properties, you
Of
know?
course, people are taking the essential essence of turmeric and the curcumin, and
Exactly.
they're
That's
they're
the
they're taking they're missing all the good stuff, but they're taking the capsule and getting the benefits anyway. But
right.
would you say turmeric is an acquired taste
Um,
for obviously not for Indians, but maybe for Americans? Would you say it's an acquired taste?
can be, yeah, I could understand
Okay.
because it does have that little bitter. It is slightly bitter for sure. I
Yeah,
think I think more of the problem there is people don't know how to use it properly.
yeah,
Little goes a long way, so I think it's overused probably, and then
okay.
when it's overused, then it increases that bitterness. Because when you use it correctly, it's actually a beautiful, beautiful flavor, you know? Um,
Yeah,
so
in the right quantity, you made a good point. The quantity is important, and I think it can be very mild when used in the. It can be very mild tasting when used in the appropriate quantity or
yeah,
protect. Do you think that using the ghee with the dried turmeric is important? Kind of moderate its effect?
yeah, for sure. In fact, it's been found
Yeah.
that turmeric is fat soluble only. So in other words,
Okay.
you're getting the majority of the flavor and you're getting the majority of the medicinal benefit when there's a fat with it. So
Mm.
yes, when you're using it with ghee or when you're using it in cooking, um, also when you pair it with black pepper, it increases its potency. Um, so then you're getting the maximum flavor and benefit from it. So in other words, just taking it and putting it in a fruit smoothie, for instance, is not going to have the greatest effect medicinally, and it's not going to help really with the flavor aspect of it. But if you
It won't taste very good, in other words.
exactly, exactly, and I think that's why most people, maybe shy away from it, or some, people who
Sure.
do shy away from it because it's not really used properly.
Yeah, yeah, no,
Really a
that's a good
nice,
point.
it's really a nice spice. And not only that, but these days, fresh turmeric is becoming more and more available. So fresh turmeric, as opposed to the powder, fresh turmeric, it comes just exactly like a ginger. It looks almost exactly like ginger.
Right,
Like
it's a root.
it's a root. Yeah, it's actually a rhizome, which is a little bit different, but it's a little bit more orangey, and you use it exactly how you would use ginger. So you peel it, you can chop it, you can chop a little ginger with it, you can mix it, and then you can saute it as a base, for a dish. Add a little black
Yeah,
pepper, you know.
I tend to only use the dry turmeric. And how about from an Ayurvedic perspective, the turmeric root? When when could I use that? When could I substitute it? Are the properties different?
I think the properties are pretty close to being the same. Um, like for in the instance with ginger, for instance, fresh ginger is considered stronger than the dry ginger. The dry ginger has a little bit of sweetness, um, and it's used a lot in sweet cooking, but it's not the same with turmeric.
Okay.
It's not the same with turmeric. Um,
Hmm.
the dried might actually be stronger. I haven't really found any information on it, but my own taste tells me the dried is pretty strong. The fresh is strong, but not as strong as not as
Yeah, I
concentrated
would
as the dry.
definitely yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. If I'm trying to enhance flavor, I'm I'm typically using the dry.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. So the bitter taste and the doshas, and
Okay.
keeping in mind the Ayurvedic perspective that opposites and similars in terms of
Yep.
how to balance. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so bitter is space and air. Space and air is pure vata. Bitter taste increases vata.
Hmm.
Plain and simple. It's going to
Hmm.
increase vata. It is the major food that's going to increase vata. Doesn't mean that vata should eliminate it because it's a very important taste in terms of those anti-inflammatory properties. but they should watch it. They should be careful. And there are ways of cooking it where you can get the benefit of it without overdoing it, sauteing it with spices and things like that. So
Or putting maybe the kale in a soup where, you've got this
exactly.
warm, kind of
Yeah,
nourishing soup, and then you add the bitter green into the soup versus eating a raw kale salad.
exactly. Sauteing it with a nice, with some nice flavored ghee or something like that. Correct. So increased vata and bitter is very good food for balancing and decreasing pitta and kapha. So it's a good taste for any accumulation of pitta and kapha.
Okay.
It's cooling.
And
Think about space and air. Space and air is
mhm,
cooling. It's cooling to pitta. And
right.
think about space and air with kapha. It's just lightening for that heavy water earth element. So we bring in the principle of opposites here, and bitter taste is a great taste for pitta and kapha.
Great. Anything else about the bitter taste?
I think that's it mainly. I
Okay.
think that's it
Let's
mainly.
move on to astringent taste, which is the sixth of the six tastes in Ayurveda.
Okay. Yep.
So
Yep.
tell us a little bit about astringent in terms of the elements that are in the astringent taste, some examples regarding foods and the impact on the physiology and the mind as well.
Yeah. Astringent taste is a very important taste. Also, it's the main elements in astringent taste are air and earth. Air and earth. So a nice combo here. A nice combo.
Mm,
Think about mud, okay?
yeah.
And then air blowing over that mud for a day or two. What happens to that mud?
Well, it dries up. It
It
becomes
dries
clay.
up. Exactly. It dries up.
Right.
This is the effect of astringent taste. It's drying,
Okay.
firming,
It's very drying.
drying, firming, contracting. So it's going to help
Mhm.
promote the healing of wounds and sores. It's going to aid in fluid absorption, and it's going to aid in assimilation of fats. This is a very important taste in terms of maintenance of our body structure. We're 60 or so percent water, right? Um,
Right.
so astringent taste helps the body to maintain a good structure because it has this drying effect on it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
it's important for building bulk, for keeping our internal environment kind of intact. Uh, and the foods here, there's a wide variety of foods here. Uh, we're talking about legumes. Legumes tend to be drying.
Yeah. Would you say that's kind of the number one thing that comes to mind in terms of astringent and thinking about, if people are moving toward more of an Ayurvedic lifestyle and diet, that the legumes, which are a big part of the Ayurvedic approach to food.
Exactly.
Um, okay. And we don't typically think about legumes as being astringent. I mean, I know I didn't necessarily think about that.
Right. Right. Because we normally make them into soups and stuff like that, but their nature itself is astringent. They're drying, so it helps.
Yeah. Yeah.
So legumes is one. And believe it or not, in Ayurveda, vegetables, and we're talking about pretty much all raw vegetables, are considered astringent taste. Again, in combination with other tastes. So, for instance, a cabbage is astringent, but astringent bitter. Okay, like the Brussels sprouts are astringent bitter. Okay, think of like fennel or a carrot
Mhm.
would be considered stringent, but they have a sweetness, so they're astringent and sweet together. Think about a tomato, for instance. A tomato is counted as astringent, but it's astringent sweet or astringent, sweet, and sour, depending on its ripeness. It's going to have a little bit of acidity in there too. So it just goes back to our idea that foods are complex. But all vegetables are considered astringent in their raw state in Ayurveda. And then the other foods are kind of like the autumn fruits, like apples and pears, that when you bite into them, instead of stimulating saliva in the mouth and making it all juicy, it's almost drying. It almost dries out the mouth a little bit. It's very different than,
Yeah,
let's
that's
say,
true. It sort of has it kind of I mean, in a way, it kind of it quenches the thirst, but it does sort of you know, the saliva, the mouth does feel drier after eating a raw apple.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's the what's called the tannins in the food. The tannins withdraw.
Okay.
You know,
Hmm.
drinking wine is not very Ayurvedic, but sipping dry white red wine is very drying to the mouth, and that's due to the tannins. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so that's this that's the categories. Those are the categories of foods. So that's a lot of really healthy foods we're talking about here. We're talking about
Mm.
the autumn fruits. We're talking about vegetables. We're talking about legumes. Um, these are all considered very, very healthy foods. These are all foods that would be, part of what would be called like the Mediterranean diet. Eat your veggies, eat a lot of legumes. Um, and a Mediterranean diet is considered a very, very healthy diet. So astringent taste is an important taste because of this, because of it has this wide category of foods and wide types of foods that are very, very healthy for us. And its
Yeah. Yeah.
main effect again is going
That's
to
great.
be this kind of drying, firming, contracting um, effect.
Yeah. You bring up a good point about the vegetables that most vegetables have the astringent taste, but there's also a combination.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's why we're not thinking about carrots as astringent because we've got the sweetness of the carrot. Um, so that's important to keep in mind that one food can have multiple tastes and multiple effects on the body.
exactly, exactly. And you have
So
to think in terms of our podcast series, we're just
yeah,
talking about what's called prakriti, the nature of food right now. Um,
right.
but we're going to be getting into something called a karana, which is the preparation of the food. What can we do to the food to change it? And we do that all the time, you know? So in other words, we brought this up already. You take a Brussels sprout and you roast it, and what do you bring out in that Brussels sprout? Sweetness. You take a
Oh
carrot.
yeah.
You take a carrot. A carrot is considered astringent and sweet. Okay. You roast it, and what happens? You bring out its sweetness. So you saute it with a little bit of oil, and you help to, bring out additional flavors, sweetness there too. So how you prepare the food also affects the food, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, that's a good place, I think, for us to conclude for today. Did you want to say, and next time we'll take right up there with Karuna with the preparation of food.
Yeah, that's where
Um,
that's next. So we covered the six
I
tastes.
know, and I actually really love that because there isn't a lot of information out there in terms of the preparation. We hear about raw versus cooked in Ayurveda,
Mhm.
but obviously that's just a very general. It's kind of like two opposites and two sides, but there's a lot in between,
Exactly.
an awful lot that people don't. I think it's great to have that information out there, so I appreciate you sharing it,
Yeah.
and the depth of the knowledge that you have regarding food. Is there anything else before we conclude, Rich, that you want to say about astringent? I know we talked about it's got the earth and the air element, so how about the doshas in terms of um, the
Yeah,
earth
yeah,
and the air, because that's a little tricky because we've got the vata quality and we've got the kapha quality.
yeah.
So how do we, yeah.
So, so the air is going to increase vata. So astringent food increases vata,
Mm-hmm.
and the earth is going to increase kapha. So
Mm.
astringent taste will increase uh, kapha and vata, and it's a very good taste for pitta. It's an
Excellent.
excellent taste for pitta. It's
But
also
the even if it increases, you know, vata in terms of like we think about legumes and okay, they may increase vata, but with the herbs and the spices that we use and using perhaps ghee and bringing in some more of the heavier qualities for vata, they can still be appropriate foods for vata when they're balanced. This is one we're going to talk about a little bit more with the preparation.
yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. I mean, that's how we become kind of artists with food in a sense, or scientists with food. You know, you
Well, it's true. Food,
we can
it
change
definitely is
its
an art and
effect.
a science.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
we can
excellent.
work. We
So,
can affect its. We can affect its. We can affect how it changes within us in terms of our dosha. Yeah, by what we're
absolutely.
combining it with, how we're cooking it, all of that. Hmm.
Okay. Well, this is we're completed the nature of food in terms of the six tastes. Is there anything that you want to say about the six tastes before we conclude? And our next episode, we'll move on to the karuna in terms of the preparation of food.
Yeah, that's our. It's going to be our next topic. Just, just a reminder that try to get the six tastes every single day. Every single meal is even better. It's a little more challenging, but certainly every single day uh, is very important. And you could just see, based on our 2 days of talking already, how vast food is. It's just you could spend a lifetime studying Ayurvedic diet and the depth of understanding food and Ayurvedic diet because we have what 7 whole areas to cover. We really just covered just the nature of food. So there's a lot coming in terms of our discussion, and it's just a joy to do.